We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Amid Beis in Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 60b. On the previous Amud in the Mishnah, the Chachamim said that if somebody lowers their price below the market price, Zocher Latov, he should be remembered for good. The Gemara said, why is he remembered for good according to the Chachamim? And the Gemara answers, Mishum dekam marvich latara, because what he's doing is he's causing the market price to go down, as Rashi says, Mishum de marvich latara. Meaning people who have this produce will see that he's gone to a low price, and they're going to sell it at a lower price as well, and that's why it's Zocher Latov. And the Gemara continues, V'lo yavar es hagrisin, a person shouldn't sift the beans, Divrei Abishol, that's the opinion of Abishol, V'chachamim matir, and the Chachamim say it's mutter. And the Gemara says, Man Chachamim, who is this Chachamim? Rabbi Yacha, it's Rabbi Yacha, the Tanya, as we learned in a Brayso, Rabbi Yacha matir b'davar hanira. Rabbi Yacha says it's permitted if it's something that it's clear that that's what you did, so then it's not a problem. As Rashi explains, matir b'davar hanira halo yachol halokeach liros ulhavin. The buyer can see, he can understand what happened. Madme hapsolas hanivra, he understands what the value is of the psolas, of that which was not good that was removed. Me'elu sheyeshnu, and that which is remaining, he understands the value. Me'elu sheyeshnu b'acherim v'tovlo lahalos b'dman shalelu yeser al kain v'nei hatorach, and he's willing to pay more than what the actual separation was worth because it took effort in order to do that separation, in order to sift out that which was bad. And so therefore, since again it's evident to the buyer, that's why Rabbi Yacha says that it is mutter. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "In mefarchesin lo es ha'adam v'chulu v'lo es ha'kelim." You can't adorn the person or the animal or the vessels that are being sold, because by making it look better than it really is, again, it's going to cause that people are essentially misled in terms of what they are buying. The Gemara says, "Tanu Rabban," and the rabbis taught, "Ein mesharvetin es ha'behema, ve'in nofchin b'kirbayim, ve'in shoren es ha'basar b'mayim." Rashi explains Mesharvetin, Lashon Sharvit Kinim Mefarish Lakameh. This language of Sharvit will be explained later on. Shazokev Sar Habehema Kesharvit Shatira Shemena. What you're doing is you're straightening out, causing the hair of the animal to look like the animal is a fatter animal by making the hair a little fuller. So that's one thing that you're not allowed to do. And then Ve'ein Nofchen Bekirbayim, Rashi continues, that means the B'nei Meyayim Hanim Karim, if you're selling the intestines, Bebeis HaTabach, the butcher, so you blow them to make them look bigger. Shayir and you blow into them so that they look larger. That you're not allowed to do. And finally, ve'ein shoren basar b'mayim, you can't soak the meat in water. Shemalbin v'hakachosh nirasham. And again, what essentially happens is by cleaning it, it causes that which is leaner to look fatter. All of that is not allowed. Again, it's misleading the consumer. And the Gemara continues, Maya ein mesharvetin. What does it mean, ein mesharvetin? So hachat tirgamu Maya dechizra. Here they explain it's Maya dechizra, which Rashi explains, Maya dechizra mashkino sam meisubin. You give the animal to drink bran water. Ve'ein nofchin maya v'sar niskaf. What ends up happening is that causes the intestines to swell, and it causes the hair to straighten out. It causes the animal to look more full. And the Gemara continues, Ze'iri Amar Rav Kahana. Ze'iri says that Rav Kahana says miskafta. Rashi says miskafta is kirtzuf ishtalir belaz. The Mesoras Hashas explains, Perush Migaredes Sheshina Avim. Essentially, what you're doing is combing out the hair, and again, that misleads the consumer. And the Gemara continues, Shmuel Shara Lemirma Tume Lesarbala. Shmuel allowed to put Tume on a sarbala, on a cloak. Rashi says, Lemirma Tume Lesarbala, fringes. It refers to putting fringes on a cloak, that he allowed. And the Gemara continues, Rav Yehuda Shara Lekiskuse Karmi. Rav Yehuda permitted cleaning ornamented garments. Rashi says, Lekiskuse an preshir belaz b'meisubin, you're using bran water to clean the garments, and karmi is begodim hamitzuyarim, again that's ornamented garments. And the Gemara continues, Rabba Shara Lameidak Tzardi, Rabba permitted to taper garments. Rashi explains, Lameidak Tzardi lahadik bigdei canvas b'makvas eitz. You essentially put them up with wooden pegs, you stretch it out, shayira chut and dak, it looks like the threads are thin. And the Gemara continues, Rava Shara Letzlume Gire, Rava permitted to draw arrows. Rashi says, Letzlume Gire Letzayer Chitzim, to draw arrows for garments. And the Gemara continues, Rav Papa Bar Shmuel Shara Letzalume Dukule, Rav Papa Bar Shmuel permitted to draw baskets as ornaments for garments. Rashi says, Dikule is salim baskets. Again, you're allowed to draw those as ornaments. And the Gemara continues, V'anon tanan, but didn't we learn in the Mishnah, Ein mefarchesin lo es ha'adam v'lo es ha'behema v'lo es ha'kelim. You're not allowed to adorn people or animals or vessels. So why was all this allowed? And the Gemara says, Lokash, it's not difficult. Ha-bechadati ha-batiki. In one case, we're talking about new. In one case, we're talking about old. And Rashi says, Bechadati mutter. If it's new items, it's mutter. She'enu ala liyafos. It just makes it look nicer. V'harotz lahosef al damem. B'shvil And if somebody wants to pay a little more because it looks nice, he's essentially being mochel the extra. But let's say it's older and you're making it look newer, that's asur, that's forbidden. Shagone v'sa'ayin, there you're misleading the person. Shenirim kechadashim, you're making it look like it's new when it is really not new. And the Gemara continues, Pirchos da'adam mahi, what does it mean to adorn a person? Again, you're not allowed to adorn a person, meaning a slave. What are we talking about in terms of the adornment? Ki hadahu avda saba da'azal tzivil l'reishil adikne, there was an elderly slave who dyed the hair on his head, and he dyed his beard. Asalakami de Rav, he came before Rav, Amar le, he said, Zivnan, he said, purchase me as a slave. Amar le said to him, you aniyim b'nei beisecha, the poor should be members of your household. Rashi explains, Tzivei shahaya zekanu lavan v'tziva shachar v'nira kabachar. He had a white beard and he dyed it black so he'd look younger. And then he said to Rava, Zivnan kaneosi, purchase me le'eved as a slave. And Rashi explains, Knani haya, we're talking here about a person who was a Knani, not a Jewish slave. The eved ivri asr lachar churban, because a Jewish slave, a Hebrew slave, is prohibited after the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, ein hayovel noeg, when yovel does not apply. And so he responded, V'yu aniyim b'nei beisacha, that the poor should be members of your household. Mishnahi, that's a Mishnah Tovli, Lefarnes Ani Yisrael. He essentially said, it's better that I support the Jewish poor, V'yishamshuni, and then they will serve me, rather than purchasing you as a slave. Also, Lakami de Rapapa Bar Shmuel. So then this elderly slave came before Rapapa Bar Shmuel. Zavne, he purchased him Yom Echad, one day. Amar le Ashki and Mai, he said, give me water to drink. Azal Chivre l'Reishel l'Dikne. So then the slave went ahead and he whitened the hair on his head and he whitened his beard. Amar le said, Chazi dana kashash me'avoch. You should see, I'm older than your father. I can't serve you in this manner. So Kari Anafshe. So then Rav Papa Bar Shmuel, he called about himself, Tzadik mitzar and nechla, so that Tzadik is saved from trouble. Meaning Rava was saved from trouble that he didn't purchase this Eved, v'yavo acher tachtav, and then somebody comes in his stead, meaning I took Rava's place, and instead the trouble came upon me. Rashi says, Tzadik mitzar nechla, it's Rava, that refers to Rava. Again, Rava was saved from this trouble. Hadron aloch hazov. We will return to you, Parak Hazav. This is the end of the fourth parak of Meseches Bava Metzia. If you're enjoying these videos and this channel, please like, share, and subscribe. And take a look at the description box below to see how you can support this channel. And we will now begin the fifth parak of Meseches Bava Metzia. And the parak begins with the Mishnah, Ezahu Neshech ve'ezahu Tarbis. What is Neshech and what is Tarbis? And the Mishnah says, Ezahu Neshech, what's considered Neshech? We'll just translate as interest. Hamal v'sela behei dinarim. If somebody lends one seller for 5 dinar, a seller is 4 dinar, so he's essentially lending at a profit. Or so asayim chitin b'shalosh, let's say he lends 2 saw of wheat for 3 saw, he wants to get paid back 3 saw of wheat. Asr mivneshu noshech, that's asr, that's considered to be neshech. Ve'ezeu tarbis, what's considered to be tarbis? Hamarbe beperos, that would be if he increases with the produce. Keitzad, how so? Lakach menu chitin b'dinar zahav akor, let's say he buys wheat from him, and the price that he sets is a dinar zahav, 1 golden dinar for a kor. V'chein hashar, and that's the market price. Amdu chitin b'lamed dinarim, but then the wheat actually goes up in value, and now it's worth 30 dinarim. So Amar Lo, he says to him, Tein lechitai shanei rotze l'mocher v'likach ben yain. He says, I want you to give me my wheat, which is now worth more, because I'm going to sell the wheat and I'm going to buy wine with the wheat, with the money that I get from the wheat. Amar Lo, he says to him, Harei chita chasuyos alai b'shloshim. He says, instead, let's cut out the middleman, and I'll give you the wine directly. Let's value your wheat at 30, because that's what it's worth right now. V'harei loch etzli bohen yain. And he says, I'll owe you that in terms of the wine. I'll just give you wine at that value. V'yayin ein lo. And at this point in time, he doesn't actually have wine. That would be an example of ribis. And Rashi explains, Ezo neshech shehu noshech. Rashi explains what noshech means. It means the shakal minei maidelo yoivle. It means he takes from him something that he didn't give. Again, essentially lending at a profit. Hamarbe bepeiros. And then we had the example of tarbis or ribis. That was hamarbe bepeiros. He increases with produce, which means hamarbe schar liatzmo bepeiros. He essentially profits through the produce. Over Gemara meforish de v'halvos kesef operos nami have tarbis. Now the Gemara will explain that whether you're lending money or produce, it's always going to be considered tarbis. Shari misrabe mamono. He's increasing his money. He's increasing his profit. V'hachan over here right now in the Mishnah, ribis derabanan kameforish. What the Mishnah is actually explaining when it says ezeu tarbis hamarbe beperos, it's explaining a ribis, a derabanan kind of ribis, which is derech mekach umemkar, which is done through buying and selling. It's not done through a loan. If it's done through a loan, that's the deoraisa kind of ribbis. If it's done through purchase, through buying and selling, that's the derabonon kind of ribbis. Dinar zav is chafei dinar kesef. One golden dinar is 25 silver dinar v'chein hashar. And again, originally that's the market price. Kach hayunim karan beir. That's what the sale price is in the city. V'huter lo lases mos achshav al manas litein lo zachit and kol yemos hashana bedamim halalo kishir ma'osav. Now it's permitted for him to give money right now on the condition that he's going to get the wheat the entire year at that price. He's essentially allowed to do that. And that's even though the person he's buying from doesn't even have wheat right now. So it can't be that he's like acquiring it at this moment. That's what it says in the Mishnah in our parak. Once the market price is out, poskin, you're allowed to set this is going to be the price. Even though this person who he's buying from doesn't have the wheat right now, there's someone else that has. It's theoretically possible for this seller to go ahead and buy them with this money, and therefore that's going to be permitted. And Rashi continues, the Mishnah then goes on and says, then the wheat actually went up after some time passed. It's now worth 30 dinar, it went up in value, and the buyer said, Amar lo tein lechita, he said, give me my wheat. Now Rashi notes, it is mutter for him to give him wheat in this situation. That would be okay, even though the wheat has gone up in value. That's not a problem. But if he's instead going to give wine, or he's going to set up that instead of the wheat, I'm going to give you wine, that's usher, that's forbidden, hoel ve'enlo, since he doesn't actually have the wine now, shema yoker hayayin, because maybe wine will go up in value. And even though he's setting up the price according to the market price of wine right now, and there's already a market price for it, still that's going to be problematic. And the Gemara will explain the reason why that's problematic. And the Gemara says, from the fact that the Mishnah abandons a case of ribis d'oraisa and instead explains the ribis d'rabanan, mechlal d'oraisa, the neshech v'tarbis chodam milsi. It really sounds like the Mishnah is saying that on a d'oraisa level, neshech and tarbis are the same thing. That's why the Mishnah had to move to the d'rabanan level when it was explaining tarbis, when it was explaining ribis. Rashi says, l'ribis d'oraisa, they abandon ribis d'oraisa, derech halva mashma, meaning ribis d'oraisa, if it's done as a loan, as we said, as it's written in the pasuk, Mar Bahona B'Neshech Uvesarbis. That's a pasuk in Mishlei, and so again, it seems like it's the same thing. Neshech and Tarbis on a Doraisa level are all one thing. And so the Gemara says, V'akroy ksivi, but the pasuk says, Neshech kesef, v'ribis ochel. It says Neshech kesef and ribis ochel. Now that sounds like it's two separate things. As Rashi says, V'aksiv Neshech kesef v'ribis ochel. The pasuk is, Es kasbech lo siten lo b'neshech. It says, don't give your money for Neshech. Uv'marbis lo siten achlech. And then your food, that's marbis. Umidacholko lebeis lavin, from the fact that it divided into two separate lavin, tarti ninu. It sounds like these are two separate things. It doesn't sound like it's the same thing. And so that's the question of the Gemara. Again, the pasuk says Neshech kesef v'ribis ochel, sounds like two lavin. The Gemara says V'tizbro, 1 second. Is it even logical to say it's two separate things? The ika Neshech below tarbis v'tarbis below Neshech. Is there such a thing as Neshech without tarbis, and is there such a thing as tarbis without Neshech? And Rashi here explains, what that means to say is neshech means that he essentially causes his friend to lose out, so to speak, but he doesn't increase his profit. Is that really possible? It should be both the same. If, in other words, if the other party, if the borrower is paying more than he borrowed, then isn't the lender profiting? And the same the other way. Is it possible for the lender to make money without the borrower paying more money? It's not really possible that you can have one without the other. That's the question of the Gemara. And the Gemara continues, Neshech below tarbis hechidami. What's the scenario of neshech without tarbis? If the case is that he lent him 100 for 120, meaning 100 prutos for 120 prutos, it seems like a classic case of interest. And meikara kaimi meya bedinka. Now originally the 100 that he lent him was worth a dinka, which is 1/6 of a dinar. Ulevasof kaimi meya v'esrim bedinka. Then it happens to be by the time he gets paid back the 120, so the 120 are worth 1/6 of a dinar. So essentially you'll say that the lender didn't really profit because the prutos went down in value. So you'll say neshech ika de kanachis le de kashakel mine midi de lo yav. You can say that there is neshech over here because again he's taking from him something that he didn't originally give, meaning he was only lent 100. Now the lova has to pay 120. You'll call that neshech. The lova is paying more than he received. V'tarbis lekan. You'll say that there's also no tarbis over here. The les le revacha, because really the lender hasn't profited. The dinka osve because he lent him a dinka v'dinka kashakel mine, and in the end he took a dinka because again at the end the 120 ended up being being worth a dinka, that ended up being worth 1/6 of a dinar. But the Gemara says that's totally illogical to analyze it like that, because sof at the end, ibasar meikara azlus, if you're going to go from what the original terms were, hare neshech vare tarbis, you have neshech and tarbis, you have the lova paying more than he borrowed, and you have the lender making a profit. And ibasar besof azlus, if we're going to go by what gets paid off at the end, so lo neshech ika velo tarbis ika, so then there's no neshech and there's no tarbis, because really you could say the lova really hasn't lost, because what he paid back, those kind of coins, then it ended up being worth less. And the Gemara continues, V'su tarbis below neshech echidami. And furthermore, how can you come up with a scenario of tarbis without neshech? So the same basic idea, idozef meya b'meya. Let's say it's a regular loan, 100 for 100, but meikara kaimi meya b'dinka, but originally the 100 is worth 1/6 of a dinar. Ulevasov meya b'chumsha, but then that 100 prutos, that actually ends up being worth more. The 100 is worth 1/5 of a dinar, it goes up in value. But again, it's the same kind of question. Ibasar meikara azlis. If we're going to go by the original terms of the loan, lo neshech ika v'lo tarbis ika, there's no neshech and there's no tarbis. The loan was 100 for 100. And he busser sof azl, so if you're going to go by what was collected at the end, so then the lova had to pay more and the lender ended up profiting. Hare neshech vare tarbis, you have neshech and tarbis. And so therefore, Elo Amar Rava, rather Rava says, Iyata motze lo neshech below tarbis, below tarbis below neshech. You're not going to find a scenario of neshech without tarbis or tarbis without neshech, meaning to say, anytime the lova is going to be paying more, obviously the malva is going to be profiting. And rather, velo chilkan hakasav, rather the pasuk only divided it up, ala lav or ala b'shnei lav, and that the person should transgress two negative commandments, but it is essentially the same thing. And the Gemara continues, Tana Rabbon, and the rabbis taught us, Kasbcha lo siten lo b'neshech, uvemarbis lo siten achlecha. It says again, you can't lend out money for neshech, you can't lend out food for marbis. Ein li ala neshech bekesef v'ribis ba'ochel. Now I only know that neshech applies by money, and ribis applies by ochel, by food. Neshech b'ochel minayin, how do we know to apply neshech by ochel, by food? Talmud Lomar, there's another pasuk that says neshech ochel, and that shows that neshech applies by food. And ribis bekesef minayin, where do we know that ribis applies by money? Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says neshech kesef, it says neshech kesef, and Rashi explains, Ainli shei over ella alav shel neshech bekesef. I only know that one transgresses the negative commandment of neshech by money, the alav shel ribis ba'ochel, and then he transgresses the lav of ribis by food. Minayin shu over al alvas peros am mishum lav de neshech. How do we know that even by lending produce, one can transgress the lav of neshech? Talmud Lomar, so the pasuk says, Lo sashech liachicha neshech ochel. It says, Lo sashech liachicha neshech ochel. You see that the word neshech is used by ochel. And Rashi notes, so mikra zeh below v'nemar. Now this pasuk that we're quoting now is by the borrower. Midaloch sev lo sishach lo achicha. It doesn't say lo sishach, it says lo sashach. That means to say that the borrower should not borrow on interest. V'harishon nemar b'malva. In the first pasuk, that's talking about the malva, the lender. T'chsiv le'el minei al tikach mito. It says don't take from him. Sounds like it's talking about the lender should not take interest. Umiu shamat mina. But nevertheless, regardless of who the pasuk is referring to, whether it's referring to the malva or the lova, we see from the pasuk mia d'shayach lashon neshech b'ochel. You see that you can use the word neshech by ochel. You can use the word neshech when it comes to food, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Aleph Amud Aleph.